The office was silent, save for the hum of the city lights bleeding through the glass. Mark stood by the window, his palms pressed against the cold pane. Behind him, the desk was a graveyard of ambition. Stacks of blueprints reached toward the ceiling, edges curled and yellowed, representing years of work that never made it off the page. Moonlight stretched across the floor, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the stagnant air. He paced the length of the room, his boots clicking sharply against the hardwood, a rhythm that echoed the emptiness of the space. Every corner held a half-finished project, a testament to a career stalled in the doorway of potential. He stopped near the drafting table and looked down at the latest set of plans. They were clean, precise, and entirely useless. The shadows deepened in the corners of the room as the clock on the wall ticked with agonizing slowness. He reached out, traced the edge of a ruler, and pulled his hand back as if burned. The weight of the room pressed against his chest, a physical reminder of the time already bled away. He was waiting for something to change, but the only thing moving in the office was the slow crawl of moonlight across the piles of paper. 5 years of Januaries. He could map them out on the calendar hanging behind the door. Every year started with the same surge of adrenaline. He would clear his desk, sharpen every pencil, and draft a business plan that felt like a lifeline. By February, the momentum would hold. He would spend his evenings researching markets, drafting projections, and convincing himself this was the one. Then came March. The cold would break, the city would thaw, and his resolve would evaporate. It was a rhythm he knew by heart. The doubt always arrived with the first signs of spring. It started as a whisper, a small question about the viability of his model, and grew into a roar that silenced his ambition. He would fold the plans, push them into a drawer, and walk away until the cycle reset the following winter. It was a pattern of starting and stopping that had defined him since the day he left university. He watched the city lights flicker outside, realizing he had spent 5 years in this exact state of suspension. He was an expert at the beginning, but a failure at the follow-through. The pattern was a cage, and the bars were made of his own hesitation. The city lights below flickered like distant, mocking stars, each one a life moving forward while he remained anchored in this room. He watched them with a hollow intensity, the glass cold against his forehead. The silence of the office felt suddenly suffocating, a physical pressure that tightened around his throat. He had been here before. He knew the exact shape of this stagnation, the way it settled into his bones like a winter chill. If he turned away now, the cycle would continue, exactly as it had for 5 long years. But tonight, the air felt different, stale, used up. He pushed himself back from the window, his heels dragging against the floorboards. He walked toward the desk, his movements heavy and deliberate. His gaze fell upon a single, pristine sheet of paper resting atop the pile of abandoned plans. It was empty, a void waiting to be filled. He felt the familiar pull of doubt, the voice that whispered it was safer to stop, but he ignored it. His hand hovered over the desk, fingers twitching with a sudden, sharp need. He reached out, his grip tightening around a pen. The metal felt cool, solid, and real. He pulled the paper closer, his breath hitching in his chest, ready to break the silence of the room with a single, irreversible mark. The ink tip touched the surface. It hovered there, a dark, pulsing point of potential. For a second, the fear returned, sharper than before, telling him that once the line was drawn, he could no longer claim he was still deciding. He could no longer pretend the plan was perfect in his head. He pressed down. The pen groaned against the fiber of the paper. He dragged it slowly, a steady, unwavering horizontal stroke that cut the white void in two. It was not a grand blueprint, not a complex diagram, but a simple, singular line. He pulled the pen back, the ink glistening under the desk lamp. He moved his hand to the side, his fingers cramped from the intensity of his grip, and wrote the words in small, jagged letters. The first step. He stared at it. The silence in the room shifted. It was no longer the empty, suffocating quiet of a failure. It was the expectant silence of a workspace. He set the pen down with a sharp click. The line remained, a permanent scar on the paper. It was real. He was no longer imagining a future. He was carving it into the desk, 1 millimeter at a time, anchoring himself to the reality of the work that had to follow. The paper sat there, but the room still felt crowded. The constant, low-frequency hum of the world outside kept bleeding in. His phone vibrated on the corner of the desk, a bright, intrusive pulse of light against the mahogany. A notification flashed a headline about market shifts, another about a competitor's success. He felt his pulse jump, the familiar itch to check, to compare, to doubt. It was a reflex he had cultivated for years, a digital leash that kept him tethered to everyone else's progress. He reached out, his thumb hovering over the screen, feeling the phantom pressure of 1,000 opinions. He stopped. He closed his fingers around the device, feeling the cold glass and the weight of the battery. He walked to the bottom drawer of his desk, the one he rarely used, and shoved the phone into the dark, narrow space. He pushed the drawer shut until the latch clicked with a final, heavy sound. The room went silent. The artificial blue glow vanished, leaving only the steady, warm light of the desk lamp. He looked at the sheet of paper again. Without the noise, the air felt clearer, thinner, and entirely his own. He was no longer reacting to the world. He was preparing to act upon it. The alarm did not ring. Mark woke at 5, his eyes snapping open to a room draped in pre-dawn gray. He did not reach for the phone. He did not let his hand drift toward the drawer where it lay locked away. He sat up, his joints stiff, and the silence of the house pressed against him like a physical weight. Outside, the city was still asleep, but his own world had already begun. He stood, walked to the desk, and bypassed the laptop entirely. It remained closed, a dark monolith of unfinished promises. He pulled the chair out, the wood scraping against the floor, and sat down in the exact spot he had occupied the night before. He felt the phantom vibration of a missed email, a sharp, familiar tug in his chest, but he exhaled and let it pass. He reached for the prototype, feeling the cold, raw metal beneath his palms. It was heavy, unfinished, and demanding. He adjusted the lamp, casting a sharp pool of light over the gears and wires. He ignored the screen, ignored the incoming alerts he knew were stacking up in the dark, and picked up a soldering iron. The room was cold, but as he leaned into the work, the heat began to rise. The first 10 minutes were the hardest. His mind kept racing, jumping toward unfinished emails, market trends, and the phantom pressure of deadlines that no longer existed in this room. He forced his eyes back to the bench. He focused on the connection point between the brass housing and the primary circuit. The solder wouldn't take. He held the iron steady, his breath slowing until he matched the rhythm of the cooling metal. He didn't rush. He didn't quit. He simply applied pressure, waited, and watched the bonds solidify. The frustration that usually sent him pacing the room stayed trapped in his hands, channeled directly into the task. He shifted his grip, moving to the secondary gear assembly. It was a tedious, repetitive sequence, but for the first time in years, the repetition didn't feel like a cage. It felt like progress. He worked through the hour, losing track of the light filtering through the blinds. His posture straightened. His movements became economical, stripping away the wasted motion of his previous, scattered attempts. When the hour concluded, he did not reach for his phone to validate his time. He picked up his calipers, measured the clearance, and kept going. The old habits were fraying, replaced by the quiet, grinding hum of a man finally building something of substance. By Thursday, the workspace had changed. The stacks of abandoned blueprints that once dominated the corners of the desk were gone. Mark had folded them into tight, dense squares and shoved them into the recycling bin, clearing a perimeter around his work. Each evening, he added a new layer to the prototype. The tangle of loose wires that had plagued his early attempts was now neatly routed through custom-drilled ports. He felt the weight of the device shift in his hands. It was becoming dense, balanced, and solid. He spent hours refining the casing, using a fine-grit file to smooth the edges until the metal caught the light without a flaw. Every morning brought a new refinement, and every night he left the desk cleaner than before. He stopped looking at the calendar, tracking time instead by the mounting pile of scrap metal on the floor and the increasingly complex assembly on his bench. On Friday, he tightened the final tension screw. The mechanism clicked into place with a crisp, resonant sound that echoed against the silent walls. He held the device up, It was no longer a collection of failed ideas or theoretical sketches. It was a singular, working machine. He set it down, wiped the metallic dust from his fingertips, and looked at the empty space where his doubt used to reside. Tuesday morning started with the same quiet precision. Mark sat down, adjusted the task lamp, and engaged the power feed to the drive shaft. He expected a smooth, rhythmic rotation. Instead, the machine shuddered. A high-pitched metallic screech tore through the silence of the office as the drive shaft seized, snapping the primary coupling. Smoke curled upward, acrid and sharp, filling the small space. Mark yanked the power cord, but the damage was done. He picked up the broken piece, the metal hot and jagged against his thumb. The device, which had felt so solid and promising just 24 hours ago, was now a dead weight of twisted steel and useless wire. He leaned back, his pulse thumping in his throat. The old familiar itch clawed at his mind, the urge to shove the entire assembly into the trash, walk out the door, and never look back. It was the same impulse that had defined every failed spring for the last 5 years. He looked at the empty desk, then at the door, then back at the wreckage. His hands trembled, not from fatigue, but from the sudden, suffocating weight of the old cycle trying to assert itself once more. He had reached the wall. Mark did not stand up. He did not reach for the trash bin. Instead, he turned his chair toward the bookshelf. He pulled down the thick, dust-covered engineering manual that had sat untouched for years. It hit the desk with a dull thud, raising a small cloud of gray particles into the light. He opened the book to the section on torque distribution and drive failure. He began to read, tracking the technical diagrams with a slow, deliberate finger. His eyes burned, but he forced them to focus on the dense, technical prose. 1 hour passed, then 2. He ignored the twitch in his leg that signaled his desire to pace or retreat. He cross-referenced the diagram against the jagged, broken coupling in his palm. The math was there, hidden in the margins of a formula he had ignored during his previous attempts. He grabbed his notebook and began sketching a new configuration, calculating the load-bearing requirements for a reinforced part. He worked for 4 hours straight, the scratch of his pen the only sound in the room. He was not looking for a shortcut. He was looking for a fix. By the time the ink dried on his new schematic, the old urge to quit had been replaced by the quiet, cold logic of engineering. Friday morning, the air in the office felt different. Mark held the reinforced coupling between his thumb and forefinger, the metal cool and precise. He slotted it into the housing, the fit tight and satisfying. He double-checked the alignment, tightened the tension bolt until the wrench clicked, and took a long, steadying breath. He reached for the power switch. He hesitated for a heartbeat. A ghost of his old doubt then flipped it. The motor did not scream. It surged, a smooth, low-frequency hum that vibrated through the desk and into his palms. The drive shaft spun with perfect rhythmic stability. He watched it for a full minute, waiting for the shudder, the screech, the failure. It never came. He let out a breath he had been holding since Tuesday. In that steady rotation, the past 5 years of scattered attempts finally made sense. He had spent years digging 10 shallow holes across a dozen different fields, hitting only dry dirt. Now, he was digging one deep well. The water was finally rising. He turned the device off, then on again, listening to the clean, mechanical song of a problem solved. He was no longer a man chasing ideas. He was a man building reality, one deliberate turn at a time. The triumph of the prototype was short-lived. By the following week, the silence in the office had changed. It was no longer the silence of focus, but the silence of absence. His phone sat face down on the desk, its screen dark. The calls from friends dwindled from daily check-ins to weekly pings, then stopped entirely. Mark did not notice at first. He was trapped in the rhythm of the work. He arrived at the office while the city was still dark, and he left long after the streetlights had flickered to life. The excitement of the big idea had drained away, leaving behind a hollow mechanical routine. He repeated the same tasks, checking measurements, refining tolerances, adjusting the software. It was a repetitive, grinding cycle that offered no immediate rewards. The novelty of the project had evaporated. Every day felt identical to the one before. A slow march through a fog of checklists and technical adjustments. He felt the weight of his own solitude pressing against the office door. He was building something, but he was building it alone. In a room that felt smaller with every passing day, the initial thrill was gone, buried under the crushing, silent burden of absolute consistency. The urge to quit arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. It was a physical itch, a restlessness that made his chair feel like a trap. Mark reached for his phone, his thumb hovering over the glass, ready to scroll through the news feeds that had once numbed his anxiety. He pulled his hand back, gripping the edge of the desk until his knuckles turned white. He looked at the wall, at the blank space where his grand plans used to hang. The monotony was a physical weight, a thick pressure against his chest. He stood up, paced the length of the room, and forced himself to look at the oak tree outside his window. It was small, unremarkable, and stoic against the wind. He reminded himself of the reality beneath the surface. The branches were not yet reaching for the sky, but the roots were already locking into the deep earth. They were growing in the dark, unseen and uncelebrated, preparing for a height that did not yet exist. Mark sat back down. He pushed the phone into the deepest corner of his drawer and locked it. He picked up his pen, opened his notebook to a fresh page, and began the next calculation. The doubt remained, but he ignored it. He focused on the math, the steady movement of the ink, and the quiet, slow labor of building something that would last. The rain hammered against the office glass, a relentless, rhythmic drumming that had filled the room for 3 hours. Mark sat motionless, his eyes tracing the same line of code for the 10th time. The air in the room was stale, smelling of ozone and cooling coffee. He had stopped tracking the hours, the sun having set behind a thick curtain of gray clouds long ago. Then, the silence shattered. A sharp, mechanical vibration echoed off the hardwood floor. It was a sound he had not heard in months. Mark froze, his pen hovering mid-air. He looked toward the desk drawer, the source of the noise. It was the phone. He had locked it away to preserve his focus, yet now it was screaming for his attention. He pulled the drawer open, the metal sliding with a harsh screech against the wood. He stared at the screen. An unknown number pulsed with a rhythmic blue light, cutting through the shadows of the room. His heart rate spiked. He wiped his damp palms on his trousers, took a slow, jagged breath, and pressed his thumb to the glass. He brought the phone to his ear. The silence on the other end lasted only a second before a voice began to speak, and the world outside the office walls suddenly ceased to exist. Mark stood in the dark, heavy velvet curtain brushing against his shoulder. The air here was cool and smelled of floor wax and electricity, a sharp departure from the stale, coffee-scented silence of his office. Beyond the thick fabric, a low, rhythmic hum vibrated through the floorboards, the sound of hundreds of people shifting in their seats. He gripped the edge of a plastic crate, his knuckles straining against the pressure. His pulse hammered in his ears, a frantic, uneven tempo that tried to override his breathing. A stagehand near the lighting console looked back, nodded once, and gestured toward the opening. The sudden flood of white light pouring through the gap in the curtains blinded him for a heartbeat. Mark closed his eyes. He felt the weight of the months spent in isolation, the thousands of hours of quiet, unseen labor settling into his muscles. The doubt that had paralyzed him for years was gone, replaced by a singular, sharp clarity. He released the crate. He took a single, steadying breath, felt the floor beneath his boots, and stepped forward into the glare of the stage. The muffled roar of the room surged up to meet him, but he did not falter. He walked toward the center, the light swallowing his silhouette. The glare of the spotlight washed away the auditorium, leaving only the sound of 1,000 people rising to their feet. Mark placed the device on the lectern. It caught the light, a polished, functional reality that drew an audible gasp from the front rows. He watched their faces bright, expectant, hungry for the narrative of a sudden, overnight triumph. They clapped, their movements a blurred, rhythmic wave of noise that pressed against his chest. He looked down at his own hands, calloused and steady, and saw not the finished product, but the long, silent nights in his office. He remembered the cold coffee, the smell of ozone, and the crushing weight of the engineering manuals he had studied until dawn. The audience cheered for the breakthrough, but his mind was still anchored to the desk, the broken pens, and the thousands of hours of failure that had built this moment. He gave a small, mechanical nod to the room, the heat of the stage lights prickling his skin. He felt the cold iron of the lectern beneath his palms, a grounding weight that anchored him as the applause washed over him like a tide. They saw a miracle. He saw the math. The applause began to thin, replaced by a low, expectant murmur as the audience waited for him to speak. Mark did not look at the front row. He looked past them, into the dark, hollow space of the back wall. The noise of the room felt distant, as if he were underwater. He tapped the device on the lectern. The solid, metallic click echoed in his mind, louder than the crowd. He realized then that the victory was not this moment of noise and light. The victory was already won. It was won in the silent office at 3 in the morning, when the technical error seemed insurmountable. It was won in the monotonous hours of discipline when his friends stopped calling. The cheers surging around him were merely an echo of a battle that concluded days ago. He felt a profound sense of quiet settle over his chest, anchoring him to the floor. The stage was just a platform, a temporary location. His real work was elsewhere, tucked away in the blueprints and the deep, persistent digging he had committed to for months. He understood now that fame was a hollow distraction. He held the edge of the lectern, his grip firm and steady, entirely present in his own solitude despite the hundreds of eyes watching him. The murmurs of the crowd died down, replaced by the sharp, rhythmic clicks of camera shutters. Mark did not wait for the moderator to step forward. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and held the power button until the screen went black. The darkness of the device felt right in his hand. He placed it back into his pocket, gripped the edges of the podium, and pushed himself away. He walked toward the side of the stage. A reporter reached out, but Mark did not pause. He kept his stride steady, moving past the heavy velvet curtains and away from the blinding wash of the overhead lights. The transition from the roar of the auditorium to the relative stillness of the backstage corridor was jarring. He stepped over a tangle of audio cables and pushed through the heavy exit door. Outside, the city air was cool and sharp against his skin. He did not look back at the lights of the venue. He kept his eyes on the pavement, his pace quickening as he turned toward the direction of his office. The noise of the event vanished behind him, replaced by the sound of his own boots on the concrete. He was already thinking about the next page of his notebook. He unlocked the door to his office and stepped inside. The room was exactly as he had left it, yet the atmosphere had shifted. He walked to the center of the floor and stood still, listening to the hum of the city through the glass. 5 years of hesitation had lived in this space. He looked at the desk, now cleared of all but the essentials. There were no stacks of unfinished blueprints, no frantic scribbles of half-formed ideas. The drawer where he once hid his phone remained closed. He touched the edge of the wood, feeling the grain beneath his fingers. It was solid, real. The old paralysis, that cold, gnawing doubt that had kept him digging shallow holes for years, was absent. It had not vanished by magic. It had been crowded out by the weight of actual, measurable progress. He sat in his chair, the leather creaking slightly under his weight. He did not feel the need to rush, nor the urge to check the time. The momentum he had built was not a burst of speed, but the steady, heavy rotation of a wheel that could no longer be stopped. He was no longer a man waiting for a chance. He was a man who had finally decided. The office was quiet, save for the rhythmic tick of the wall clock. Mark reached into the center drawer and pulled out a fresh, unlined sheet of paper. He laid it flat on the surface, smoothing the edges with his palm until it sat perfectly square. He leaned forward, the chair responding to his movement with a soft, familiar weight. From the pen holder, he selected his favorite instrument, feeling the balance of the metal against his fingers. He did not hesitate. He placed the tip to the paper and began to write. The ink flowed in a steady line, forming the first word of a new objective. It was not a grand proclamation, but a precise, manageable task for the following morning. He finished the sentence and set the pen down, the sound of it hitting the wood sharp and deliberate in the stillness. He looked at the paper, then back to the empty space where his prototype now stood. The work was not finished. It was merely evolving. He stood up, walked to the window, and watched the first light of dawn begin to touch the horizon. He knew the road ahead was long, but he no longer feared the distance. He had found his rhythm. He turned back to the desk, ready to begin again.